In this video, we are going to work on making a basic granny square. Granny squares are the foundation to a lot of really fun projects, from clothing to bags to blankets. You can keep going and make them as big as you want, but in this video, we are just going to do rounds 1 through 4. Let's go ahead and get started. To begin, you will start with a magic ring or chain 4 and slip stitch. This is how I do my magic ring. There are 100 ways to do it, so just do what works best for you. After we have our magic ring, we are going to chain 2, and this chain 2 does count as the first double crochet. Next, you will make your first granny cluster. A granny cluster is a set of 3 double crochets. So we'll add our second double crochet, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Again, you'll yarn over, insert into the magic ring, pull up 1 loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. After our first granny cluster, we're going to chain 2, and this is going to be for the corner space. After we chain 2, we'll add another granny cluster, so that's a set of 3 double crochets. So we have 1, 2, and 3. We need a total of 4 granny clusters separated by a chain 2. So we're working on the third granny cluster. We'll chain 2 and then 3 more double crochets. So we have 1 double crochet, 2, and 3. After the third one, we will chain 2, and then we have 1 more granny cluster for this round. I do try to keep my magic ring organized as I'm working into it so that it doesn't twist when it's time to pull it together. So we'll chain 2 and then work on our last granny cluster of this round. So again, a granny cluster is a set of 3 double crochets. 1, 2, and 3. After the final double crochet, we will chain 2, and this will be our last corner for this round. Now it's time to join the round with a slip stitch. I like to slip stitch through the first true double crochet. You can slip stitch through the chain 2. I just think it looks nicer to use the double crochet. And that's the end of round 1. Beginning round 2, we'll start with a chain 2, and that counts as our first double crochet. Next, we'll turn the work. And for round 2, we're going to be making all granny square cluster corners. So that is 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. And we're working into the chain 2 space from the previous round. So that's 2 double crochets because our chain 2 counts as the first. This is the third double crochet. And then next we'll chain 2. And put 3 more double crochets in that same chain space. So we have 1, 2, and 3. So this is our first corner completed. Next, we're going to chain 1 to skip the next granny cluster and put another corner into the chain 2 space. So we'll do 3 double crochets, chain 2, and then 3 more double crochets in that same chain 2 space from the previous round. After we've completed that corner, we're going to chain 1 to skip the next granny cluster from the previous row, and then put another corner into the chain 2 space. So the corner is 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. So we've completed our first granny cluster for this corner. We'll chain 2 and then add another granny cluster in that same chain 2 space from the previous round. So next we'll chain 1 to skip the next granny cluster and then head to that chain 2 space from round 1. And we'll be putting in our final corner. So 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets, all in the same chain 2 space. After we've completed the final corner, we'll chain 1 and then slip stitch to join the round. Like I mentioned, I like to slip stitch under the first true double crochet. After that, we are going to secure the center of our granny square so it doesn't come apart while we are working. So using the tail end of your yarn, go ahead and thread your darning needle. In this video, I'm not doing it as secure as I normally would, especially if it was for a wearable, but you'll get the idea. So you take the darning needle and you thread it under the bottom of the double crochets from the first round and thread it through as many times as you can to make sure it's really secure, especially if you are doing a sweater or something that will be getting a lot of use and having a lot of movement. After you have threaded it through, you're going to pull really tight to close that center. And then you can trim the tail or knot it or finish weaving it in. For this video, I'm just going to cut it because I'm not actually using this granny square for anything other than demonstration purposes. Moving on to round 3, we will chain 2, and that counts as the first double crochet. So chain 2 and then turn your work. Now we'll be working a side granny cluster, so a granny cluster that is on the side of the project, and we will add 2 more double crochets, and we're working into that chain 1 space from the previous round. After you've completed the first granny cluster, we will chain 1 and then move to the corner. So we'll be doing 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets, all in that same chain 2 space, that same corner space from the previous round. So we have granny cluster number 1, chain 2, and we'll add that second granny cluster for our corner. Next, chain 1 to skip over the next granny cluster. And we'll be working into the chain 1 space from the previous round and adding a granny cluster to the side of our granny square. Chain 1, and then we have another corner in that corner space. So in the corner we have granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster. Next, we'll chain 1 to skip the next granny cluster, and then add 1 granny cluster in the chain 1 space from the previous round. After that granny cluster is complete, we'll chain 1 and work on our next corner. So 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets in that chain 2 corner space from the previous round. After the corner is complete, we'll chain 1 to skip the next granny cluster and then into that chain 1 space from the previous round. After this granny cluster is complete, we'll chain 1 and move into our final corner for this round. Next, you'll chain 1 and slip stitch to join the third round. Now you can see that the granny square is really starting to take shape. For our next round, we will chain 2, which counts as the first double crochet, turn our work, and then place 2 double crochets into the next chain space. So into the chain 1 space from the previous round. Next, chain 1, and we will work a corner in the corner space from the previous round. Next, chain 1, and now we're working into the sides. In the last round, we only had 1 side space, and now we have 2. And that's how the granny square grows. So each round, you'll have 1 more space on each side. You can make the granny square as big as you want to, and the pattern will always remain the same. So you'll place 1 granny cluster in each side space, and then 2 granny clusters with a chain 2 separating them for each corner. After you finish up the second side cluster, you'll chain 1 and work another corner into the corner space. I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video, but feel free to pause it and go at your own pace. Next, we'll chain 1, slip stitch to join, and our granny square is complete. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. My name is Amara, by the way, and if you have any questions or need clarification, please feel free to reach out.